Check, check. Hey, we're live. We're all still alive. So it's a bit of a meet and greet. These folks who have all worked together for a long time that we have here up on stage have probably not seen each other, well, Fred, for some time, right?
You know, you take 2 weeks off, and yeah.
Yeah, you're glowing up here.
Someone's
Someone's just come back from a hot holiday, showing off his tan.
Yeah.
Well, we could not be more thrilled to have the three of you up here today. I've actually had the pleasure of working with all three of these individuals pretty much since I first started working in agriculture. So you've seen my journey in ag right from day one. So really grateful that you're here supporting our organization, sharing some really important messages. And a whole part of this conference for you here in the room has been ensuring, you're hearing about issues that are important to you from lots of different perspectives. And we've had a big theme around sustainability, which will be no surprise. Any conference you go to, that's on the hit list. And that's important. We wanted to hear lots of conversation about that. Something that we talked about yesterday, we had a public trust panel that I led. It's not just about our domestic customers, it's also about our international customers as well. So I'd like you guys to each go through, introduce yourself, talk about what you do, and some of the initial messages you'd like to share with the crowd today about the importance of our export markets, how sustainability matters to them, what you do on the farm is important to our customers all around the world, and how can we forge a path forward in navigating these challenging markets today. Alanna, you're in the hot seat.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I guess almost afternoon, and thanks so much to CAP and to Brenna for the invitation to be here as part of today's panel discussion. Of course, it seems like you had lots on the agenda yesterday about sustainability related to public trust, and then I thought this morning's sessions were excellent. Ag in the Classrooms session obviously directly linked to sustainability and the pressure we've got coming at us from a public trust perspective, and then even the presentation by Kark as it relates to some of the challenges we have on sustainability, let alone the presentations by David McInnes and the very first panel that started off the day. So I'm a farmer from Edenwald, Saskatchewan. I farm with my husband, Jerry Hertz. We're grains, oilseeds, and pulse producers. And I'm also the board chair of the Global Institute for Food Security, which probably maybe isn't as well known here in Manitoba as it might be in Saskatchewan. So that's a partnership of Nutrien, the government of Saskatchewan, and the University of Saskatchewan. We do work globally with partners. We also do have quite a few partners here in Manitoba. So our work is focused on ensuring global food security that has a focus on sustainability, but that sustainability being environmental, economic, and social. So we're in the business of mostly crops and crop improvement, and looking to use innovation and technology to advance sustainable solutions for global food security. Saskatchewan's the world's largest exporter of many products, and so we're looking to leverage what we're already doing, getting even better and better, and then using some of those technologies that we discover, develop, and deliver, and ensuring that farmers around the world also have access to some of those technologies to be able to become more food secure themselves. I'm also involved in a few other organizations in the industry, and it seems like I'm a former deputy minister of agriculture in Saskatchewan, and when I started there in 2007, I talked a lot about social license, agriculture awareness, all of this linked obviously to sustainability. So as much as we tend to beat ourselves up a bit that we aren't where we need to be on sustainability, I'm very excited that here we are having sustainability, as you said, Brenna, on every agenda now. So it is front of mind. We know this is an important issue. We know that we need to be thinking about it. And I think we also need to give ourselves credit on how much improvement we've made on talking about it, but also the practices that we've implemented on our farms. The reality is we do have some of the most sustainable agriculture and food production in the world. And we need to be able to tell our story, be able to champion what we're doing, but also focus on continuous improvement. Our work is not done here, and sustainability, I think, is now table stakes for us to be in the business, to not be regulated and policied out of business. This is what keeps me awake at night. And I want to make sure government policy and regulation doesn't take our tools and technology away so that we're allowed to feed the world. and also on making sure that we're holding ourselves to account, that we absolutely are focused on continuous improvement, not waiting for the regulators to tell us what to do, but to have an industry-led focus on sustainable solutions. And I think we've come a long way, and I think we're going the right direction, and we need to double down and make sure we stay focused on that. And I guess I will also say that we can take a lesson from oil and gas. Who thought that, of course, we're always going to need energy, and let us just do our business because the world needs our energy. We've seen what's happened in the Canadian oil and gas energy sector, and the reality is we're not allowed to now provide energy to the world. So I hope agriculture can take a lesson from maybe what the energy sector did as far as not kind of trying to get out ahead on telling their story. Not only just doing the right thing, but demonstrating and telling the world how we're doing the right thing. Canada is one of the most sustainable energy providers, and now we're not, because of policy rules, not able to provide energy to the world. We can't let that happen for Canadian agriculture and food. So I'm looking forward to today's panel discussion. Thanks.
I'm already so excited by just even hearing this today. It's so funny, Alanna, because one of the things I usually say, if it's not mined, it's grown. And there is so much commonality, and like you said, something that we can take away from that sector. They have faced many public trust challenges. It's a global issue around that perception, but people need energy. So just like people need food. So you're 100% right. I'll also note everyone here today on this panel is a producer. Something we talked about yesterday was how can producers get involved? Not everyone can serve on a board. Not everyone can become a deputy minister or be a member of parliament. But, there's other ways to get involved, and this is just an example of, we have 3 individuals here today who have each been a part of agriculture in their own different way.
I know you need to move on to Ted and Fred here, but I guess what I'll say is I compliment CAP. Obviously, you're a group that represents farmers, so you get it, but not everybody gets it, and so I try to emphasize, no matter what audience I'm talking to, is not about farmers without farmers, and too often we're talked about in rooms, especially on sustainability, and we're not there to bring our voice and bring our solutions. So, thanks for having 3 farmers on the panel today to talk about this.
I like farmers, but normally we would have some cocktails between us right now having this conversation. But I know we'll do that maybe later. Ted, on to you.
Well, thank you, Brenna, and it's great to be part of watching you grow up.
I know. I was telling the group yesterday that Cap and I are the same age this year. We're looking pretty good, I think. Maybe a little rough around the edges this morning, but
we're hoping that someday you actually do grow up, Brenna.
That's not going to happen.
And we won't even get started on age, because Alanna and I go back when I'm sure she was 18 when we first met.
Okay. Thanks,
and
Ted.
we won't,
Thanks.
We won't go there. We won't go there. But thank you to CAP. And I've got to admit, there's only one thing I like better than speaking to a group of farmers, and that's speaking to classrooms of kids. I got way better questions from those kids than I ever got in the House of Commons. And it was fun answering them, because they come from an honest background with their questions. No biases. They want to learn. And I was in Edmonton. Ironically, we tend to put province compared to province. I'm not making much of an introduction of myself, but it came to mind this morning, well, Manitoba's doing this, Saskatchewan's doing this, Alberta's doing this. And Alberta is in the same situation as far as funding ag in the classroom. Well, I had a meeting with the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Agriculture, and I have a meeting next week with the Minister of Education. They used to. So we brought up what Saskatchewan's role is. It's so important. I mean, to Alanna's comment, we used to, especially Alberta, we used to depend on what's always going to be there, oil and gas. We've got gas leases on all of our property. Guess what? Those will be gone, and we'll still be growing food. So don't forget, where your future is in this country. So I think we should actually switch those. Each one of those should have farmer first. Because nobody's going to put on our headstones, we were Deputy Minister of Agriculture, or we did this, or we did that, or I was a member of Parliament. But farmer, that you can wear that proudly till you're no longer here. It's so fundamental. So I started farming. I grew up on a mixed farm, didn't make much money on that farm. Had a few other diverse roles, but I had excuse the language, I had a brain fart and went into politics. But you know what started that? Was agricultural politics. And I realized early on in my farming career, my wife and I farmed for 30 years. Early on in my career, I realized that I could do whatever I want, I could think whatever I wanted, how I wanted. I could talk to my neighbors till I was blue in the face about what we need to do to promote agriculture. But if you're not involved in policy development, so that's back where Alanna and I go back to. And I live by this. If you're not at the table, you're on the table. You need to be there when the decision makers are making decisions, or you will not be happy with the outcome. Sustainability, every one of you probably would give me a different definition of what sustainability is. And so would every public servant in the Department of Agriculture, more so in Ottawa, but even more so in the Department of Environment, ECCC in Ottawa. What is sustainability for agricultural food production there? And we worked, Brenna and I, and a number of us in the room here, worked on trying to develop a code of practice. We took a run at it. We made some mistakes, admittedly. We got too caught up in the minutia of, we should be doing this. Well, in PEI, you can't do that. In the Palliser Triangle, you need to do this. You don't need to do that in Quebec or Ontario. We got caught up in the minutia. And if we had simply changed the opening of each statement in that original code and said, farmers do. We got caught up in farmers should, farmers must, this needs to be the code that farmers follow. We should have forgotten about that and just said, hey, farmers are already doing this. And that's what we should be saying to people in the city that are buying our food. Farmers have done this. We've taken our farms from, let me just give you a short example. When I bought my first half-section land, there was 60 acres of alkali. Isn't that the other S word? Salinity. We changed our farming practices. Now, every square inch of that half-section produces a crop every year. Sometimes not the best, because we live in the Palliser Triangle, but it's producing. It's because we learned from the past, we have better technology, we're able to be more sustainable. And sustainability to me is simply, is this land going to be better when I leave it to whomever is going to farm it next? Am I leaving it better? Is it sustainable? Is it economically sustainable to get me through my farming career? To me, that's sustainability. And it's a message that farmers are best to deliver, whether it's at the decision-making table or whether it's at Thanksgiving dinner, to be able to explain that we do the best we can and we're providing a safe and secure food supply. That was not a very good introduction, but I'm Ted.
I thought it was real good. I think something that you talked about in regards to even the code of practice, which, I mean, we could even do a whole session on that, but I think it's about that continuous improvement, realizing, hey, you know what, we could go forward in something and sometimes have to take a step back and learn, because this is an evolving process, and I think we're all trying to grapple with how do we find solutions. And I think as long as we're focused on those solutions, I don't know if Carly Reimer is still in the room. She and I are always very focused on being solution providers to issues. And so if we can keep on focusing on that as our North Star, I think we will all prevail on, even if we make mistakes and people get upset saying, we made the mistake, now how do we make it better? Especially on this issue, because it's incredibly important. Fred, on to you. And part of the reason why I wanted Fred here is because you're a good guy. You're one of my favorite producers I get to work with.
What, and I'm not?
No, I mean, Ted, you're okay. We'll keep you around. But when I first met Fred was when I was working at Cereals Canada, and Fred was the chair of Manitoba Wheat and Barley, which then became Manitoba Crop Alliance. But Fred was going on a new crop mission to international markets. And that experience of the farmer being there right directly in market, talking about that sustainability, talking about what we do, our regulatory system, how farmers make their own decisions on their farm, which, by the way, and you'll note this, I'm sure, is everyone's very surprised. One of the number one questions the producer gets on these new crop missions is, so does the government tell you what to grow or what to do? And that's how they perceive how farmers a lot of times will produce food. So the government comes to tell you to grow wheat, and this is how much they should grow. Or you're told that you could be a dairy farmer, but that's up to the government to decide. And it's like, no, this is my business. And that really changes the conversation around what you do matters, and that it's the power of the producer that influences that. So Fred, introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, I'd love to, and thanks, Brenna. I don't think I've ever heard that once before, that I'm somebody's favorite, so it's nice to
You made
hear
the
that.
cut, Fred.
Yeah. And I think it's also an illustration of how the labor shortage is impacting Manitoba, because I'm in the third seat here after these two esteemed people to my right. And yeah, it's hard to add anything to what they've already said. In my introduction, I guess I wanted to let you know I farm in southwestern Manitoba, seed grower. We have a few cows too, and just give you a bit of the background on how I learned a little bit about what our customers want and need. So it was back in the mid-90s. I was a board member with Cantera Seeds, and I was able to attend the variety registration meetings that I think we all have had frustration with in the past. But I was able to sit on the wheat, rye, and triticale evaluation teams, and it was there that I started to learn there was more to our grains and wheat than just physical appearance and protein content. You know, gluten strength, water absorption, ash content, and flour extraction and functionality were just a few of the attributes that all of the bakers and millers wanted to see. Then there was very few farmers that were able to vote or even attend those meetings, as the Canadian Wheat Board were representing us as producers. Now, you know, on these three evaluation teams, there's significant presence of producers and seed growers and members of commissions. So it just, I think, adds to Ed's point that farmers need to be there right up front. And I think whether you like it or not, it is a better system now than it was 20 years ago, that's for sure. And as Brenna said, I was with Manitoba Wheat and Barley Growers, and I took the combine to customer. Of course, it was put on by Cereals Canada, and that also greatly improved my knowledge of what market support our markets require. And I certainly can't stress enough the support that the Grain Commission also provides to our customers. If any of you haven't taken the course, I highly recommend it. There's generally producers from all three prairie provinces in the grain producing area of BC, and you get lots of networking and you learn a tremendous amount. I think there's still two more.
Yeah, this is the time of year that the Combine to Customer takes place, and usually each of the organizations, so I think it's Canola, Pulse, and I think a few other groups, they are asked to supply members or producers. I don't know how the program works now, but you can have farmers sign up to be on the course. It's always posted on Twitter, so you can follow Cereals Canada for that.
Great, thanks.
A little plug there.
Yeah, no, well done. And then I guess serving on the Western Standards Committee with the Grain Commission also, you know, really broadened my understanding of the whole value chain, including domestic millers and bakers, on what they needed. And that was also during the time when the gluten strength issue came up. If we all remember the 4 major varieties that all had gluten strength issues. So yeah, it was really. I want to thank all the producers actually for allowing me to be on that, because that really improved my understanding of the whole value chain, and that grain handlers weren't our enemies. That they, yes, they have to make money. They understand we have to make money too, but they don't set these arbitrary targets. They're hit for a reason, and they're working on our behalf as well. And then finally, as Brenna said, I was able to in 2019 go on a new crop mission to South America, and it gave me firsthand knowledge on most of the customers' concerns and needs. And even then, there was questions about sustainability. And at that time, they were also wondering how they could leverage our great reputation and our great quality wheat and barley to help them in their marketplace. So that was interesting to see. I think the tagline or the brand we were trying to keep hitting was, it's consistent quality, consistent baking, clean and sustainable. We let them know that we're producing more grain on a unit of energy now than we did in the 60s, and all while improving our soil quality. Look, it was a very powerful message to be able to deliver. And Brenna's point was, then we would get questions about, how do we know? How can you verify that you're applying pesticides correctly, or you're doing what you say you're doing? So I think moving forward, that's when I had an aha moment that, we need to do exactly what we're doing, but we just need to tweak it a little bit so that we can continue to not be displaced in those markets and keep serving them. And the other thing I didn't realize, at least in South America, that we were always of the understanding that we just have a blending wheat, that very rarely do they use 100% Canadian product. And some of it's logistics for sure, but in South America, a lot of the smaller mills was 100% Canadian product. So that was great to see.
Yeah, that's really great. And by the way, you'll note he likes to go to places where he can get and maintain a tan. So South America was his choice. But each of you have traveled globally, especially Alanna and Ted, regarding trade and the priorities of trade. And something that it's a really hot button issue right now is the influence to our political leaders on non-science-based decision making, and how that plays a role in our trade world as well, especially when it's around this clean, consistent quality for Brand Canada, which was a brand I definitely fostered when I was in my previous role. How does that impact us and our ability and that freedom to operate even if our own regulators or decision makers here at home are not using science-based processes? Because ultimately, we're out telling consumers, our global customers, we have the best product possible, but it also, we're being contradictory when we have different messages here at home. So Alanna, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I know you have a lot of experience. I'm sure Ted will want to jump in 20 times throughout the conversation, but start us off with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ted definitely is more of an expert probably in this because of his federal experience. But, I actually followed Ted. I guess there was a couple presidents between us, but I'm a former president of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, so is Ted. So did a little bit of representing Canadian farmers and agriculture exporters at, WTO negotiations, which now seems like a lifetime ago, and WTO still, not settled on agriculture negotiations. But that was my first opportunity to kind of be in the market representing Canadian agriculture and food and farmers. And then when I was the Deputy Minister of Agriculture, went on quite a few trade missions, with our Premier, Brad Wall at the time. And so getting to be in the market, similar to what, Fred's experience was, actually talking to our customers in Japan and Indonesia and, Korea, China, India, all over. And so, I think Canada, still can stand behind a regulatory system that is very rigorous and ensures that we have safe, plentiful, nutritious, and frankly, quite affordable food, even in this time of inflation, still quite affordable food. And, you know, our customers around the world are really interested in accessing, you know, this steady supply of really safe, good quality, you know, and a reliable supplier, though sometimes our transportation system puts a glitch in that, and that's a whole nother topic. But, you know, our international customers depend on Canadian agriculture and food products coming to them because we do provide food security for many of those nations. We do have an excellent regulatory system. And so I think we do have a lot of things to be able to sell to maintain that market access, because we are science-based. We do have strong regulation. You know, we do have farmers that are following the rules, making sure they're using, you know, registered products, making sure that we're providing, you know, safe supply of grains, oil seeds, pulses, livestock products, you know, into the export value chain and supply system. I guess where I have a bit of a concern is different than what it used to be like when I was representing Canada internationally and Saskatchewan internationally, is that Canada used to champion our regulatory system and used to be able to speak from a science-based perspective that we had one of the safest, if not the safest, food supply, and we could stand behind our regulatory system with CFIA, PMRA, Health Canada, AAFC, and so the Canadian government, didn't matter the politics, would champion our system and our industry and our agriculture and food producers. It feels a little different now. You know, it sort of feels like now maybe our Canadian government is out there actually saying that Canada isn't good, that we have a problem, that we aren't sustainable, that, you know, we're somehow, you know, not leading edge, that we need to do better. I'm all about continuous improvement. I'm all about making sure we're getting better and better. But I do have a concern that the Canadian government is no longer championing what we have. It is no longer focused on really sticking to the science. It has to be science-based, Brenna. You talked about that. It has to be. If we don't have science to lean on, what do we lean on? Public opinion comes and goes and is very fickle and isn't focused on facts. It's often focused on fear or Twitter or Facebook or what their neighbor said. And frankly, what some marketers say, which isn't science-based, like, for example, you know, not to pick on them, but the non-GMO label, you know, not real fair marketing, not based in science. So we have to stick to the science. Canada used to be a leader. I think we still are a leader in reality. We're just not a leader in communicating externally. So we've got to get back to, you know, sticking to the science, making sure we do continue to have strong regulation, and that we do follow the rules here in Canada, because you know, we are focused on that in the agriculture industry, but we do need to have some stronger sort of advocacy by our Canadian government in international markets. Otherwise, we're going to lose market access. It's going to cost us.
Absolutely. And now, Ted, this is where you're going to want to jump in. Working at that federal level and actually being in the position where you're having those discussions on how decisions get made, having your, you know, previous constituents coming to you with their concerns, and, you know, bringing that forward and having that influence as a science-based process. So understanding that consumers of our domestic world that are your constituents influence those policies, but ultimately having that bigger picture and that national landscape of the value of Canadian agriculture to the Canadian economy. How do you deal with that? And how did you manage some of those conversations? And how did you ensure that when you were going internationally that you were able to be consistent in promoting that story of Canada, as Alanna was talking about, and being that champion? I'd be curious of your thoughts.
There's a lot of ways to answer that, and I'm going to diversify a little bit here. I can't help but go back to Catherine Cherwick's comment, and I think we should have elaborated more on it. These young people that she showed you in the pictures, and she said, these are going to go on to be the public servants that are advising the ministers. And that, therein lie, and I'm going to give a sales pitch for Ag in the Classroom, therein lies...
They're getting a lot of those, Ted, so don't worry.
But I was in Edmonton promoting the same thing.
Pull out your checkbooks, everybody.
But that's, you know, how do we share with people the importance of our agri-food production? It's interesting, you know, you talk about examples internationally. This is a free trade agreement that most of you have never even heard of, and it was the EFTA, and it was the European Free Trade Agreement. And I went to sign the initial phase 1 of that in Liechtenstein. This is going to be interesting. How much food is grown in Liechtenstein? None. So I toured, they had a tour set up of a food processing plant. These are the countries. This EFTA agreement was with the non-EU countries. We were trying to figure out a way to get our food into the EU. And we were a long ways from CETA, which, I don't know, it's actually just getting approved in some countries. This was our back door into the EU. The food processing plant that I visited used only Canadian wheat because they loved it. They sang the praises of the Canadian wheat. So what they were doing was putting together meals that went into confectionaries, roadside gasoline stores, into the supermarkets in the EU, all over the EU. We were going in the back door. I can say it now because we're now working on a CETA agreement. And I said, well, you know, you provide pastas, only Canadian durum. They wouldn't even consider anything but Canadian durum for their pastas, and they had the packaged meals. So they had buns, they had pasta, and it was all Canadian. And it was our secret back door into it. So it was then that I realized how important it was. This is when I was still in opposition, a great learning opportunity to be in opposition, opposing government. I'm not good at that. If I can't offer something better, I don't like just complaining about it. I was invited by the then Trade Minister, Jim Peterson, to go to India. And on the flight over, he said to me, "What are lentils?" I mean, Jim was a sweetheart guy, loved him. He'd never been on a farm. He didn't know what they were. His staff had him booked in 2 sessions with about 50 to 75 pulse brokers in India, in Mumbai and New Delhi. And he sat down beside me. He said, "Why don't you take these sessions?" He said, "At least you know what lentils are." And I had more fun with those brokers because they'd never actually met a farmer. And they were giving me hell. And they said, "You know what? The lentils last year weren't that good. And we paid the same price as we did the year before." I said, "You know what? We had a frost on the 22nd of August. They got nipped a little bit." And I said, "And you know darn well you've been buying a number 1 lentil for the price of a number 2 for 10 years, so suck it up." And they all laughed. But you know, it's that kind of thing, the recognition of what we're producing as food, and the recognition of the number, I'm getting off topic, the number of people that we feed. And we've seen it this year with food insecurity. And we are pivotal. We have the responsibility to promote our agri-food industry, not just to feed ourselves. Yes, we need to be economically viable on our farm, but to help feed the world. And those trade agreements, they're hard to do, they're hard to negotiate, they're very important, but critically based on what we're doing here. And I'll try not to get political, but I worry about the fact that going back to the people that are making the decisions, it's not the decisions being made in the Department of Agriculture, it's coming from Environment Canada, and those people have never been on a farm. I'm on the Board of Governors of Olds College, and having fun with it, helping promote agriculture. That's an agricultural-based college. We have a farm, an Ag Smart 2 days in August. So I've been inviting people that I know from the Department of Agriculture, Federal Department of Agriculture. Had a couple of associate deputy ministers come out. They were just gobsmacked by what agriculture was doing. And I thought, oh my goodness, there is the disconnect. They had no idea the technology that's involved in it, what, you know, the high tech, but the improvements in genetics and how we're handling our livestock, the outcomes of that. So is there a disconnect? Even more so with this present government. That's the only political comment I'll make.
I told Ted to behave. So well done. You're almost back on the good list. I think it's something interesting that you had said before, Ted, around, it's actually a message that I've been very big in promoting, especially with CAP, is policy matters. The reason why you're all here is because policy matters to you, and you know how it plays a role in your operation. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this room today or part of our live stream audience. Not everyone realizes how it's connected. And that's where that being at the table, having a common voice, participating is absolutely critical. And not only does policy matter, where policy is made matters. So policy made in Brussels, shouldn't be impacting how you farm in Saskatchewan, Alberta, or Manitoba, right? And I think that that's where, there's a massive concern, I think, from I get a lot of phone calls on Sunday mornings from producers who, have lots on their mind. Maybe they couldn't sleep the night before about what does this mean for my operation with the EU Farm to Fork or some of these other agendas that are out there or plans that are out there that may work in that region or may not, but that are now influencing policy here. And I think that this is where, Fred, I've actually, I know that we sent a film crew out to your farm many years ago, and they couldn't believe, wow, this is huge, and this is an amazing farm and operation, and this is so interesting. And meeting with you as directly as a farmer, they'd never met a farmer in their life, and being out to be on your farm, on your land, if they knew that policy made elsewhere was going to be influencing your operation, that wouldn't be something that a regular consumer would even think about, that would actually change how you might have to operate it. So as a farmer who is doing his best, who's focused on continuous improvement, sustainability, how are you working to operate in an environment where consumers and people have no idea what you do, policymakers are disconnected, and international markets are coming back to you? How do you, in that hopeful person of focus on continuous improvement, navigate that? What are some things that you're doing?
Well, on our farm, I guess we're much like Ted and Alanna. That sustainability for us first is profitability, and then we have our long and shorter term sustainability goals, which is to always leave it better than it was before, and every decision we make, that always enters it. We get thrown a few curveballs by Mother Nature and the weather, and that goes out the window, but overall, we're certainly improving it. I can't stress enough what a positive message we have to give, and we just need to get it out there. Excuse me. It's not COVID, I promise. It was.
You are a traveler. We're concerned now all of a sudden. Would you like some water?
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Bill, you're a very good host. Thank you.
So we, and policy is no easy thing, and kudos, and Bill, thank you for that. Everybody loves research. That's kind of where I've been serving producers, but nobody agrees on policy, so when you can herd those cats. But wherever I go, I always start talking to people, and I purposely wear a Monsanto coat with a DeKalb logo. You're
trying to trigger people. That's what it is.
Just
Spark
to
the conversation through triggering.
Just to poke the bear. And it's surprising. And initially, you're a bit angered that people who've never even, grown a tomato is accusing us of poisoning them with what we're doing. So, they are tremendously receptive to being set straight. And it's not enough to just keep saying the message that we're doing such a great job. I think we've got markets that are ours to lose, and I think we need to start by addressing those. And I believe that the science will prevail, and that we'll get to the table and we'll set our own sustainability parameters or code of practice or whatever we want to call it, and we won't have the EU's thrown down our throats. So I'm really quite optimistic that we can get that done in the near future.
No, and I think that that's where, you know, having you here today, because I know you're definitely a champion. You're someone that's out there promoting what you're doing, and you have that vision and understanding that, you know, we can't just say the same thing over and over again and hope that people accept it. I think that's been a running theme here is, yes, we can communicate about it, but I actually gave an example. Trish Jordan asked me previously from Monsanto, how do we get people to care about our issues? And I said, newsflash, we got to care about their issues, right? And I think it's interesting when you talked about Latin America and, you know, how heavily that market is reliant on Canadian products. What's fascinating is that in these countries, in these export markets, they follow all of our media. They have within their government departments and companies, you know, in Japan especially, you know, they're monitoring even farmers, right? They look at these things. They look at what's being said. They follow what's in the newspaper. You know, they're interested in the environment in which we're all operating in, the things that we get upset about. And when you go internationally, they say, hey, I saw a couple farmers, or I saw a message about, you know, the GM wheat event, for example, or, you know, a code of practice. People are upset about that, or the reduction in 30% for nitrous oxide emissions. Our export markets are following this. So they're so reliant on the products that we provide them. They're even following our social media to see what's the trends, what's really happening, what are the undercurrents. So when we talk about to the group that's here in the room today and live streaming, and that message about how do we even if it's just you alone at home with your phone, you know, how do we influence that brand Canada, I think is maybe something that is an easy, simple thought that our group here today, and I'm sure you guys will have thoughts on this, can be a part of sharing. So what are some of the messages, Alanna, that you feel that this group can be empowered to share that you want the whole world to hear about from them?
Well, you know, I think what's at risk for us, obviously, you know, as farmers and as an agriculture sector is definitely, you know, our economic sustainability and the economic prosperity of our provinces, our regions, and our country. So that's what's at risk for us and our ability to operate. You know, I think what's at risk for the world is food security. The reality is they do rely on us for that regular supply of our agriculture and food products. So there's real risks. I think the opportunity is that, you know, just at the Public Trust Summit that was held a few months ago, and there's annual surveys by the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, is, you know, sort of what's on Canadian consumers' radar, what are they worried about, and who do they trust? And so, you know, I think the concern is that during COVID, actually, we saw kind of consumers worry less about regulations and more frankly just about full grocery shelves, and you know, even less about affordability. Now what's coming back post-COVID is far more concerned about affordability, as of course we see inflation and the price of food increase. You know, still climate change, the environmental impact is still a concern for Canadian consumers, but it's mostly about affordability. So that's something for us to understand. And, you know, annually that survey is provided, and we should be paying attention to that as farmers and farm organizations.
John Jameson was here yesterday.
Oh, okay, right. I forgot about that. I missed him. Yes, exactly. Well, then you heard all about it. But then you also heard from him that the most trusted still in Canada are farmers. So our voice is really, really important. So what can we do then as individuals is, you know, we can make sure we're communicating. We can make sure we're telling our story on our farm. We can make sure we're talking to teachers and students and consumers. We can make sure we're talking to our friends and neighbors and family, because sometimes our own families don't understand what we're doing and some of the products we're using and why we do what we do. So kind of being our own sort of best communicator. And I will say, if you can't do it without being angry and defensive, maybe don't do it at all. And just fund the organizations that can do a better job of communicating on your behalf. I'm just calling it straight. Like, if we're going to be angry and tell consumers...
That's why you're here, Alanna.
You should just be happy that you're getting food.
That's your real voice, Alanna.
Yeah. That's not going to work anymore, right? So then fund organizations like CCFI or like Agriculture in the Classroom or, you know, whatever the case might be. But, you know, you should be able to get the message right because it's your own business and it's your own operation that we should very easily be able to communicate. And then make sure you're also talking to your representatives, your MLAs, your MPs, get that message out. You know, if you're involved in an organization, make sure you get that message out. And, you know, I sort of said, you know, not about farmers without farmers. That's important. So make sure you're going to all the opportunities it can be. If there's consultations by the federal government right now on sustainable strategy, if you have an opportunity to get in the room or talk to an MP, make sure you're, you know, thinking about what your message is and then get it across. And I would say that we all think that government policy is super complicated and complex and sophisticated, and what can we contribute? And I would like to sort of simplify it by saying government's run by the people who show up. So we better show up, right? We tend to think phone calls and emails and texts and meetings don't matter, but they do. And other people will show up. The environmental groups and consumer groups will show up, so we have to show up too.
I have a good example of that. So I was part of the national food policy work, and there was myself and Ryder Lee from Saskatchewan for the Cattlemen's Association that were there. There was no one else from agriculture in the room for that session. There was about 200 people that were there on national food policy. It was shocking. And I think that's what's actually hard for, I think, a lot of organizations as well, is navigating who's going where, who's at what table. Did we even get the invite? I think that's actually something. So I think that's making sure that you're encouraging organizations like CAP or others that you're a part of to make sure that they're getting involved, that they're asking the questions, and that they're getting the invite to these meetings. That's something that we're working really diligently on, because you're absolutely right, Alanna. Being in the room for those things is critical. I was sitting at a table with a group of dietitians, a couple people that ran food banks, actually a few educators, teachers. Their understanding of agriculture was incredibly limited. And it was a really good discussion. And I took a Crop Life Confident Conversation discussion panel and how to have those conversations even better. And it actually ended up being really positive. So for the 6 other people sitting at my table, I was actually able to share my passion for agriculture and say, hey, I'm just like you. I grew up in a city. You know, I don't come from a farm. You know, I used to run an organic health food store. You know, I understand that you have questions. This is what I've learned. They were curious about, you know, what is glyphosate? Why is it important? You know, we keep on hearing about it. That's why I don't buy these granola bars. And I'm like, if you care about sustainability, you want these products. You want the innovation. You want the technology. And that's something that when we were coming up with this panel even is around, these are some of the concerns that our export markets have, but they also want sustainable products, right? And so I think that's really the essence of this today, is for you to do what you all do best as producers. And I know, Ted, you're not farming anymore, even though it's always in your heart. But for you to do what you do best, you need the access to these tools. And those export markets and our consumers here influence potentially your access to that. So Fred, I would like to come back to you, and I'd like you to share any other thoughts that you'd like to have with the group today about your experiences in export markets, what you've learned, what the power has been, what you've shared with your neighbors about the importance of understanding it's not just farm gate to elevator, it's you're part of a bigger system.
Yeah, it might seem like it's kind of the same thing again, but I guess my takeaway from the the new crop missions is that there are consistent, high quality, safe Canadian wheat is absolutely the right strategy. I think farmers, plant breeders, researchers, and the whole value chain just need to keep up the great work. I also heard that in future, just saying that we're doing it isn't going to be enough. I think we're going to have a little more assurances. And to Ted's and Alanna's point, we get a question on a new crop mission, and it was about MRLs. So that's kind of a grain commission answer. And the guy said, well, no, I want to hear what the farmer says. So we do have a tremendous amount of power, and then Alanna chairs the CN's Ag Producers Advisory Council, and I sit on that, and we were having a tour of the port in Vancouver, and the Port Authority had a couple of their officials there, and they're asking us as farmers to help them lobby in Vancouver to get more land that was originally commercial for loading away from condo development. So we do have a tremendous amount of power and a voice. We just need to give it traction. And maybe finally, these markets are ours to lose. You know, we're going over with one trade mission into areas where the U.S. has offices and are making multiple visits monthly. So now's the time. You know, I think we need to seize the opportunity. We get lots of requests as producers, but I really believe that the sustainability that we have done and will continue to do is just the next natural evolution of our high quality, clean grain brand moving forward, Brenna.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm sure there's going to be some questions from the crowd, and then we'll do a wrap up, but I'm sure people have questions, so please come up to the mics.
Hello. Hello, Larry Wagner, Manitoba Forage and Grassland. My question is, you guys are talking grains. How about in the livestock industry? We're seeing a big cutoff there. It's not profitable. We're seeing an exit from the industry. How do we go forward and rebuild what we've lost? We've seen the Canadian Food Guide take out dairy and the reduced amount of animal protein used. The COP15 that was in last month in Montreal cut the normally 33 to 35% animal protein down to 15% is the recommendation going forward. How do we go forward and promote ourselves in different ways? And with protectionism in the States, we need to find different markets for the products we do have. Thank you.
I'll start on that. My farm is right next door to where the grasslands begin. So a lot of my constituents didn't wear ball caps. They wore cowboy hats. And they're very troubled by this. They've done an incredible job. When we were working, trying to develop this code of practice through the Canadian Roundtable, we patterned it. We actually had an individual from the Beef Roundtable give us advice on what they did. Very successful. They had a large partner, a food right to the table partner that helped. And we struggled with that in the cereals roundtable. But they'd done an incredible job, but to your point, not successfully getting that through to the decision makers in Ottawa for them to push back against the activists. I appeared at a House Commons Standing Committee. They were wishing they hadn't invited me to come down. This was back in October. And one of my comments was, I've had enough of the full-bellied activists telling me how to farm. You can imagine how that went over with several socialists in the room. It didn't go over very well. And I told you I'm going to try and behave.
Yeah, that's one across.
Yeah, I know that's one. But it is. It's how do we do that? But when you look at the best tool that I think God has created for us is the rough fescue grass in my part of the world in the foothills. It's one of the best, if not the best, sequestration tool that nature has given us. And you graze it, and it comes back. But it sequesters more carbon into the soil than any pea, pulse, lentil crop that I ever grew. But that doesn't get factored into the equation that the activists see or the decision makers in Ottawa see. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the livestock sector is getting a really bum rap, and I am not giving up beef.
Well, I might just quickly and say, don't have to tell you that livestock are key, that they utilize land that can't be used for plant protein, which is what everybody is focused on now. So, the food supply system is so important to think about it in a full system. And when you think about how livestock can utilize land that we can't, growing crops, it's vital that we have the full system in place. So absolutely this challenge right now of, sort of consumer activism based on, I think, not facts, but, some fiction and, a little bit of, sort of trendy thinking about meat consumption. Government policy and communication hasn't probably helped on that, so we need to, turn the corner on that. And so that's about, just making sure we try to get our message through, have the right people in government, and then thinking about directly sort of communicating to consumers, because you do have a great sustainability story in livestock. And on that, again, ag in the classroom, communicating to teachers, future consumers, I think this is key. And the last thing I'd say is I think we're getting a little better in agriculture at looking at the full system, where plant protein, yes, I'm a pulse grower, but it's not to be an advantage over animal protein, that we're in it together. And so I think we're starting to get our message better in agriculture, because we were sort of beating ourselves up, where we were sort of waving the flag, isn't it great that we're large pulse producers and plant protein is all that, but it's in combination with meat protein that we're going to end up having, good diets, good nutrition, good options for the world's consumers. So.
Fred, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I feel your pain. Yeah, I feel like I have to put my hand up and say, yes, I have a problem. I have cows. Addiction, yes, exactly. But I really do see a brighter future. I think all of the funding that's going into cover crop to increase soil health, like a grazing animal on that, just makes perfect sense. And if we can hold on long enough that we can get those messages out there, I think we'll have some success, especially in addition to all the lobbying government and the great work that CAP does on that. I think we just need to keep pushing that.
And one thing I'm just going to add as well, this is why at CAP we're really wanting to focus on the full plate story, which is why it's been a theme of today to, speaking about individual commodities is important. So even though our commodity representatives might be focused on canola or pulses or beef or bison or whatever it may be, the more we can talk about food together as a meal, the better off we are, because everyone knows or not everyone, I shouldn't say that. It's about balance, and we need to promote that balance. One of my favorite things to tell my friends, family, neighbors about this story and trying to create that balance is, when we look at food and what we're consuming in a day, agriculture has the answer. If you're vegan or you have a dietary restriction, agriculture is the answer to that, right? We have options for people. If we start removing options, if we don't support these sectors, and we have someone from the bison producers here, there's other niche, crops, or, Manitoba is very diverse. If we lose this diversity, we're taking away from people's plates the options of what they can consume. So that's something that I'm really passionate about communicating, is agriculture is the answer to what you as a consumer want, but it can't be at the expense of one crop versus another, or one, livestock animal against another. So, David.
David Rourke, District 1, farm south of Brandon. I did my master's in zero-till back in 79 and 80 and practiced zero-till for 35 years. Decided that we wanted to be a little bit more self-sufficient, I guess, so we went organic. Did that for 5 years. We could make money if money was the only thing you could do that. I also started a PhD in search of net positive carbon grain farming in Western Canada, and it no longer fit the scenario going forward. We need a full toolbox in order to tackle the challenges that we have ahead. But sometimes from the organic side, they like to refer to us as chemical farmers, or they have other things that would suggest that we're not as good. In fact, we're better. And I've been wrestling with it, trying to find a name for what we are. And one of the most, so I listed affordable, because I think the other side is expensive. And if they think 10% food inflation is bad, then we just go to organic and it's double. But I guess, what's next? continuous improvement, absolutely we need. One of the things that does bother me on our zero-till plus side of things is the use of glyphosate and overuse, even if it's just from a weed resistance point of view, we could lose that very valuable tool. So, you know, what, and then of course, you know, the tox it's not a completely benign chemical. So how do we make sure that we have that tool for a long time?
I'll start on that. It's a touchy enough subject, but I haven't gotten up the nerve yet to walk into a strange audience with a Monsanto jacket on either. It's a very touchy issue, and it's a tough one, and it's difficult, going back to some earlier comments that Alanna made, it's difficult to not go in there defensive and say, you know, well, of course, it's part of my environmental contribution. I've reduced the tillage on my farm because I have glyphosate. Something that was just so telling to me, a U.S. farmer and a friend of mine were having a discussion about cleaning out your sprayer tank. And the American said, "What do you mean?" Well, you know, when you rinse your sprayer tank. So I never rinse mine. It's pre-seed glyphosate, in-crop glyphosate, post-crop, like burn down, whatever. Never rinsed a spray. Like, and then you wonder why you have weed resistance? I mean, it's overuse of anything like that. And is it the answer? No, but we need to use that as an option, and not everybody's going to use it. I mean, one of our biggest challenges is the spat that we've had between farming with chemistries and farming without chemistries. And back to a comment that Brenna made. You think people aren't listening to that? You guys can't even get along amongst yourselves. You can't decide how you should be producing food. So why should I trust either one of you to be growing safe food? That's not an answer to your question, because yours is a question that I don't have an answer to. But can we deal with it better? Yeah, we can, explanation-wise.
Well, I mean, I don't think I have an answer either, except to say that, you know, organic food is a consumer choice. It comes at a cost. You know, I might say that I couldn't figure out how to farm organically, but some people have figured it out, and it's about all the options for consumers. So it's not one or the other; it's all of them. I don't know that it would provide food security, but provides consumer choice, and so every farmer might decide, you know, they'll operate their farm based on, you know, what they think is best. But as it comes to glyphosate, you know, this is such a critical tool for us. It's so critical for sustainability, for sure. And this is where I worry about the unintended consequences of maybe well-intentioned policy, where governments might think, or some of our customers might think they're deciding that they're getting sustainable production by saying they don't want, for example, glyphosate used, and yet at the same time they're getting less sustainable food because they've taken some of our tools and technologies away. So the key is that we somehow be able to communicate to policy setters and regulators that we need all the tools and technologies, and then we better govern ourselves accordingly as farmers, right? So we also have to be responsible and do the right thing. And this is where I say, you know, when I used to be in the government, is don't invite me into your house because I will never leave. So you better get it right? Like, we better do the right thing on our farms.
We only have a bit of limited time to our schedule, but I will respect everybody's right to ask the question, get the answer, get it concise, let's move along, and that part. But just, yeah.
Darren.
Hello. I'm from District 12, Swan River Valley. I also represent the Manitoba Bison Association. I'm a member of the CBA Association, and it's an honor to be in your presence with Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta represented here. So my question is, with the bison probably being the best red meat protein in the world, how do we take it from what we are right now to that next level? Thank you.
How do we take, so the question was, how do we take bison, which is a excellent red meat protein, how do we take that to the next level? I think how do we take these really great products and how do we promote that? Because we were talking about this earlier. That's a big beast of an animal. You're a brave man to be managing that. Bill talks a lot about his cattle and all that. So how do we take this niche product and how do we amplify it?
Can I just add, Alanna talks about this. It's a food choice. Yeah, bison, wonderful. We've got one of the larger processors that actually processes bison. The rest of the year he does horse meat, so you be the judge of that. And we could all just say, well, we should ban horse meat, or we should just everybody eat horse meat. It's a personal choice. Is it a nutritious protein source? Absolutely. Is it a delicacy? Absolutely it is. How do we do it any different? We accept the fact that everybody wants a different diet. And I used to say, people would say, well, what do you think of this protein? Get all your proteins from plants. And I said, as a grower of pulse crops, I really don't care if a cow eats it, or a pig eats it, or a person eats it. It's your choice. And so we can't influence them, but I'm a fan of good bison as well.
Jack.
Jack Fraze, Manitoba Canola Growers. My question relates to influencing the decision makers. It seems like most of our MPs come from urban districts, 6 major cities across the country, and we're asking them to make decisions on our behalf, and they don't have a clue what they're talking about. What about commodity organizations getting together and making sure every MP gets a farm visit, and also the major bureaucrats, so that they know what they're talking about? I've noticed whenever we've had guys come to a farm, and you give them the experience, and we're not talking a lot of guys at one time, a couple of MPs at a time, show them what the farm is all about, what kind of technology you're embracing, the risks, everything that goes with it. And each one that has come to a farm has had a farm experience, and they never forget it. Next time they're acted on to make a decision, they make an informed decision. The activists are coming at them from every which angle, but they've seen what's actually happening. I just want to know your opinions on it.
Well, I'll just quickly say, we've got a farm and food care organization in Saskatchewan, also Ontario, and I think PEI. Those are the 3. We utilize a farm and food care to make sure we're connecting with dietitians, nutritionists, that kind of thing. And then some of our commodity organizations and commissions are, trying to connect, other members of the public and influencers to our farms. Politicians, absolutely, and as you said, senior, public officials need to have that same experience. I think it comes down to us as farmers and farm organizations kind of trying to coordinate that. I think it makes all the difference in the world, Jack. Absolutely, seeing is believing. Coming out and experiencing is really going to have all kinds of impact. It's a great idea. We probably need to get on that and think about who are the annual visits and what farmers are stepping up to the table to volunteer their farm.
I was mentioning that I appeared at the Agriculture Committee, House of Commons Standing Committee and I offered a standing invitation for the committee to come out to Olds College Ag Smart Days. That would be an eye-opener for them. CAP should be. Every other commission should be inviting them to come out, arrange some visits to Fred's farm. And they will happily come. I actually saw in their break week, I saw some of them out on farms, some of the Ag Committee. Bring those. That's where you start, and then move on from there.
And I'll just say that we also have invited some of the members of Parliament and some of the senior officials to the lab at the Global Institute for Food Security, because I think there's also a great story to tell on innovation and technology and how that's also advancing sustainability and helping us to do a better job. So, it's not just farms, it's also all of us invited and sort of included in the supply chain. I think we all have a great story to tell, and so we're all in this together. I think we all can invite people in to tell our story.
Fred, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jack. And to some of the other comments too, I think it's important that we just raise the awareness of all agriculture, whether it's bison, beef, pulses, and I feel a lot better about myself up here on the panel after Mr. Lentil guy selling it in India. Like, how ludicrous is that? So that just, you know, really drove it home, Jack's comment. Yeah, like, and let's, you know, let's work together, at least as Western Canada. Like, wherever, you know, the ag ministers meet, that's where they should meet a farm that day. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me if it's in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or Alberta, but yeah, I think there's maybe some more producer organizations that aren't just Manitoba. We need to work collectively to do that. Great idea.
And I'm just going to add to that. I think that this is the opportunity for CAP, right, as well. I think that this is really where we need to play a lead role in this. And I see Daryl's here with a question as well. No, you got time. Well, we've got about 2 minutes left here. But Daryl talked to me when I first started about building a strong advocacy capacity for the province of Manitoba. And I think that's really what you're talking about, Jack. And part of being able for us to have a good advocacy capacity is ensuring that we're all working together, that it's not about one group doing it, another group doing it. We have to do it together. It's too confusing for consumers. It's too confusing for our politicians. It needs to be a one-stop shop, a one-stop message. That's the full plate story. You're 100% right. They need to know. Daryl, you're the last guy. You get the last say today.
Thanks. I think I'm going to be...
Oh, sorry. You're not the last one. Go ahead.
I'm hoping to be complimentary to Jack's question, but Alanna, given your background in senior bureaucracy and Ted, your background on the political side, my question is about the current state of the calculus around political risk from the politician's perspective. So when we go and visit them, how do we present a compelling package to them that helps them deal with the political risk? And I don't know the state of that political risk. Here's the thing, to navigate to markets through sustainability is going to be tough. It's even tougher when we layer on top of that the need to adapt to things like climate change. And government has a role. I see farmers stepping up. I see, you know, other elements of the private sector attempting to step up. Government is going to have to step up if we're going to make zero by 2050. And what's happening is that I think it's not just that we're country people and not city people, we don't have the votes. There's something about political risk that says if I ask our Minister of Agriculture to get to the markets with a sustainable product and to adapt to climate change, I need $2 million to develop drought-tolerant soybeans. And you know what? To be honest, it might not work. How does that play out in the minds of the politicians now who are always turning on this political risk question? Is there something you can tell us how to approach these politicians and help them deal with that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, Ted's more the politician here than me, but I've been around politics a lot of my career, and I've been on the political side of government, also then as a deputy minister. And, you know, I guess I'd just say a couple things in response to your question is, you know, go in with, yes, your concerns and your challenges, but also go in with solutions. I think too often we go in sort of with raising all of our concerns and worries on how they're doing things wrong, but I don't think often enough do we as agriculture representatives go in with the solutions. So here's the problem and here's the risk that you as a politician are worried about, but here's where we think we've got the solution in agriculture. And Brenna talks about agriculture as the solution. I believe we are the solution. We're the solution environmentally, we're the solution socially, we're the solution economically. Canadian prosperity relies on agriculture and food being, you know, operational with all the tools and technologies, providing sustainable food production for, you know, a food secure world. But, you know, putting that in sort of facts, the jobs that are at stake, the economic, you know, challenges if we can't operate, how we operate sustainably, that we are a carbon sink, we're providing, you know, all kinds of consumer choices. So, you know, going in with sort of some quick facts, yes, have our concerns, but then have quick facts and how we're the solution. And the other thing I would say is often we think about the politician being the target of our lobbying. I would say there is a whole, you know, bureaucracy. That sounds negative. I'm not saying bureaucracy in a negative way. I mean, the public service is there to serve us as the public and to serve, our political leaders. But political leaders come and go, and they often don't have a good understanding or, a good diverse experience. Our public servants do, and they're there year in, year out, government in, government out. So don't forget them. And go in and not use them in a negative way, but I mean utilize them, because they're the steady hand at the wheel, and influencing them ensures that information flows up to our decision makers. So don't forget them, is what I would say.
Hear to that. Ted.
Don't forget, you have to layer on top of that the 4-year election cycle. Timing is everything. To Alanna's comment, I used to like to tease the public servants in the Department of Finance when they offered a proposal that we should move forward in the Department of Finance. And either Jim Flaherty or I disagreed with it. And we'd get pushback from the public servants. And I would say to them, I know that you know that you're going to be here long after we're gone, aren't you? And they didn't like that, but it was factual. They're there constantly. That's why I didn't so much invite the Minister of Agriculture to come out to Ag Smart Days at Olds College. I invited the public servants that are advising the minister, because they will be there, whoever the next agriculture minister may be. And that's, Alanna makes an incredibly good point. Go in proudly. Go in and be proud of what you do. You have the answer. Go back to our rough fescue in the foothills of Alberta. That's one of the best methods of sequestering carbon. Do you think anybody in the Department of Environment in Canada actually understands that? Go in and proudly tell them what we're doing. We're not the problem. We're contributing. We have the solution. We've changed our farming practices. So we have a better environment. We're treating our soil better. There's a study going on in the Senate of Canada right now on soil health. Incredibly valuable. Hope Cap has suggested they'd come and provide a witness, telling our story, telling it proudly.
Thank you. Bob, you were a very good date last night at dinner, so I guess we'll let you squeak in.
I'll be very brief. Bob Lepischak from the Manitoba Oat Growers Association. I thank you for sharing your wisdom. Ted, remind me again to smell the grass. I reflected in your comments. But I have a short comment here and question. See if you can give us a Coles Notes response to it. What is your concern about current sustainable growing practices based on the continued conflict between Russia and the Ukraine?
That's a tough question. If I had the answer, I'd be over there helping them. It's a tough one. But basically, in my mind, is we need to be able to work with our government to be able to produce the most amount of food we can sustainably to fill that gap. That this is a 1-year gap that they didn't get oil exported. It's not canola oil, but it's okay. It's what Africa can afford. If that's interrupted 2 years in a row, we've got a real issue. And if we come to the point where, let me use an example, if we don't have Matador to protect our canola crops, which we basically don't, what's our overall output of canola to crush for oil to take up the fact that there's not very much sunflower oil coming out of that region? It's a serious issue, and I don't think we should be contributing more to help Ukraine for food security, if nothing else. Not just food security for them, but for the regions that they supply food to. The whole African, Western Asian area. It's a real issue. That was a tough question, sorry.
So just to follow up in a little bit, and I won't expect an answer, but I have to ask this question because You are all farmers, and put it in perspective. And you've led us through this navigating markets, and you have expressed the importance of export customers. How do we deal with the liability of the producer when he gets his check in the pit or at the harvesting facility for the red meat? How do we ensure that value chain is at the same level of standards that we expect the primary producer? And I think that has not been expressed or anything in this when we deal with blending and some of those particular issues, because we're guilty if they make a mistake. So I think that needs to be part of that conversation as well. So
Yeah, there's no answer there, Bill, but I think it is viewing us as a value chain, making sure all the players are at the table having the conversation about sustainability and standards. I think we're better than we've ever been. We've got a long way to go yet.
throughout the value chain.
Can I make just one quick comment? This is going way back, touring the United Grain Growers Terminal in Vancouver. And we did the whole tour and watched it dropping into the vessel and went back into where they were doing the sampling of what was going in there. And this guy looked at me and he said, "You grow the crappiest grain." He said, "It's full of weed seeds. It's terrible." I said, "Show me your sample." He said, "I wouldn't sell that.
You wouldn't take it to the elevator.
I wouldn't take that to the elevator." I said, "The grain company that I deal with apparently added a little bit of something that I did not grow in there." So you're right. My credibility with that gentleman was in the toilet because I grew crappy grain, dirty grain. So you make a good point. I mean, we lose control of it when it's dropped in the pit.
Yes. So join me in thanking our panel here today for this very engaging conversation.